Okay, so I just wanted to do a video showing how I'm using a modified Back to Eden garden technique to do my gardening and orchard. I say gardening and orchard because I'm planning to do my gardening among my orchard. So wherever I have a tree, I want to plant like one or two vegetables around the base of the tree. Now I know that means they're competing, but if I make the soil rich enough and if I water it enough, I think it can support both functions. And my dad does not want me planting too much more in the backyard at this time because it's already a lot. I planted a lot of stuff, and so there's a space real estate issue. Plus, technically, if I built a separate garden from the orchard, even myself would be concerned about the space loss because I don't want to convert the entire yard to just gardening and orchard stuff. I still want to have a yard for the purpose of recreational sports, playing catch, practicing golf, all kinds of stuff with our daughters. So I don't want to lose our entire yard, and so planting multi-purpose using the space that's already been allocated for the orchard to also be used for the garden is the aim. So the Back to Eden method I saw seems to be the smartest, the best way to do any type of growing I've ever seen, but I don't have access to cheap or free wood chips like the man in the video, Paul Gauchi. So my twist on it, which Paul fully endorses, is to use little twigs and leaves that fall down from the trees in the fall, which my dad rakes up into piles and leaves it over the winter. I want to use those piles underneath my trees slash amongst my garden stuff, as well as use our grass clippings, because my dad has one of the mowers with the bags on it that collects the grass clippings, and he dumps the bags in the backyard in the woods area back there, and that naturally forms like a compost. But I want to be using those grass clippings and shoving those underneath my trees and amongst my garden stuff as the covering, and that acts as vegetative matter to be broken down by the microbiome, by the worms, the little insects, the fungus, and the bacteria that's in living soil. It will eat that, so it's like feeding those a salad. But the main thing is you're putting vegetative material in sufficient quantity onto your stuff. So that all is mainly just Back to Eden garden method or no-till gardening that I'm using, where I don't want to disturb the soil because that breaks up the little channels that the earthworms create, which creates great channels for the roots to follow down with no resistance. They actually follow the same tunnels the worms make. So you don't want to till and ruin that. Ruin all that airflow as well that's created by all those tunnels for the air to distribute to the root systems and to the little creatures living down there. So you want to keep all that. So tilling's bad, for sure. That's a huge takeaway to the Back to Eden method video and follow-up videos I've seen. And I agree with it. It makes complete sense. Plus, you're literally chopping up insects that are doing all that work for you, breaking down all the vegetative material you're feeding, that plant salad you're giving to the ground. Another thing, though, that is the big takeaway of this video, which I'm going to show you guys, is using tarp over the top of that vegetative matter, which is weed barrier fabric. That's the big great innovation I added to this method. So that way you have zero weeding in theory, and this weed barrier fabric I selected is breathable. So it's got perforations, it's woven, and it allows for rain and water to get down and air to get down in there, but doesn't allow weeds to come up, makes the area darker, and creates a protective barrier against birds being able to dig around in the mulch and pick out little bugs and worms. So it's actually creating a even safer environment for the bugs and worms to come up. Plus, I think the bugs and worms generally stay away from the topmost layers anyways, unless if it rains heavily or something. And this encourages them to come up and eat those top layers, so they'll be eating even faster, even more stuff, in theory. So that could be another side benefit as well. But the biggest thing is, I believe the weeds do come up. Paul Gauci and his wife have admitted openly they do regular weeding. It's just much less difficult to get the weeds out than compacted dead soil would be. And it's also less weeds in general because they water less, because the wood chips retains water for so long that in between rain they don't need to water because it acts like a sponge holding onto that water for long periods of time. But they still do get weeds because weed seeds are still blowing in from neighbors and whatever, and that lands in their wood chips, and those do get watered when it rains or whatever, and they do grow little weeds, and he has to rake them. I don't want it. I want to get rid of that step as well. So my idea was to put tarp down over the top of everything as a weed barrier. One of the downsides of weed barrier fabric is if you do the traditional way, which is lay that on top of your soil and then the mulch on top, it stops the mulch from feeding the soil, which is actually basically idiotic to do it that way, which is how everybody's doing it. It makes no sense at all. And then even if you have a breathable version, it gets cluttered by all the debris that lands on it. The finer debris gets seeped down through the topmost layers, lands on that fabric, and it's no longer breathable. It completely stops it. And then when you pull up that fabric, the ground underneath it is rotting because it's anaerobic. It's got no access to air. And so it can't thrive and be living. It smells like death and decay. It's not good soil for growing your food in. So you actually want to have healthy, thriving soil and a thriving microbiome with a good balance of insects to fungus to bacteria. And so you want good airflow and breathability in the soil, and you want good access to water. And so putting any type of landscape barrier fabric underneath the mulch is completely idiotic. But using it on top of the mulch takes advantage of its benefits, which is stopping weeds dead in their tracks in a major way, more than even heavy mulching would do. You retain that benefit, and you also protect your mulch as well. So it's a cover for your cover. Paul Gauci is all about covering the soil, protecting that soil, and I say cover your mulch and protect that too. Now nothing's getting into the mulch you don't want getting into it, and everything about the mulch doing its work to feed the soil is still there, but you're still getting the benefit of the weed barrier fabric. So I just love it, and I'm going to go through it all in this video. Also, when my dad does the mowing, when he went over my mulch layer, which I just had as grass clippings, the grass would sometimes get blown off of that area by the mower's blades creating all that wind, and you lose grass over time when the wind's heavy. Your mulch layer is getting blown off. By you putting tarp down over your mulch when using leaves and grass clippings, you're keeping it pinned down so it can actually do its job for longer and not have maybe half or even 2/3 through the course of a couple seasons getting removed just through wind and rain, whatever, and the mower just blowing it off of its directed place that you put it. So it's a great way to pin down your mulch and keep it in place. Also, Paul Gauci talks about using a cement barrier between his yard grass and his wood chips. This prevents the grass from creeping onto the wood chips. To do that around all my trees would be a significant time investment, and I don't have a set boundary line that I'm ready to claim around my trees, because as the trees expand and grow their drip line in diameter, I want to expand my mulched area to match about the drip line, or maybe a foot outside of that drip line. So every year my mulched area under my fruit trees is going to grow in diameter so that I can always have my mulch layer matching the root development, the diameter of the roots. And so I'm continuing to feed the soil and enrich the soil outwardly as the trees require it. But having like some tiny little 3-foot tall fruit trees with like a 40-foot diameter mulched area around them to support their roots it would look ridiculous. And plus my dad would challenge that. He wouldn't like that. I know it. I'm trying to have as little impact and gradually take over the yard. As the trees grow, I'm taking over more real estate with them. So I don't want to just jump the gun on that. So little by little, year by year, I'm going to increase the mulched area, and I'm not going to extend it much past the drip line of the trees. This will also benefit the situation with the mowing that my dad does, because he won't have to mow underneath the tree and duck and stuff, because I'm going to keep the tree pretty low to the ground. And so having that all mulched and weed free and grass free will mean he'll have less mowing to do through time, and he won't have to bend or use any weird angles for the mowing. So everything's by design, everything's being carefully thought out here.
So you can see I got a wheelbarrow full of leaves. Since it's springtime, these leaves are actually full of worms. I got them from the woods in the backyard, and you can actually see worms. Like, look at this worm right here. They're like everywhere. I've seen like a whole bunch of them, and they're sneaky. They'll hide. Like, you don't see them, but then once you start lifting up the leaves, you'll start seeing them. So basically, I'm fertilizing with this. So I'm putting down weed tarp, but then you just put, like, once every foot, you put a garden yard staple, and then you can see this is all full of leaves. And I did that around the tree too. Here's the tree. So I'm loading it up. You can see it's about like 2 inches thick with leaves and little branches and stuff. And I'm bringing in a lot more worms, and they're gonna eat this. They'll eat all the leaves and sticks. It's natural mulch. It's going to break down way faster than mulch in the form of wood chips. And it comes with the free worms that were already in it. And this would be under a tree naturally, feeding the tree. So naturally, condensing it around my little baby trees is going to bring all kinds of micronutrients, because the worms and the little bugs will break this all down, and that will feed into the soil. So I'm just going to do that every year. I'm going to put weed tarp down and staple it down. I got my sprinklers here, right here, and I'm going to leave that up all year. It's going to protect it from the sun, and this will all carry a lot of moisture when it's watered each day in the summer, and this will be full of worms and little creatures eating this, breaking it all down until it's all flat again. And maybe like I could restuff it with yard clippings 3/4 of the way through the summer if they eat all the leaves. If I notice it's starting to get flat, I could restuff it by hand. So I'm just stuffing it all by hand, and then I'm respiking it down. I think it's a really cool method to do the mulching. So I just did this first. You can see weeds starting, but I keep them trimmed by hand. But this, I won't need to do any more weeding, I don't think, this year. We'll see though. It's all experimental, but stuffing this with yard clippings or leaves is the ultimate. And I get it for free because our yard naturally produces leaves, and they're just, my dad or the neighbors just dump them back in the woods behind our houses by the trail, by the railroad tracks. So I'm just reclaiming that stuff, recycling it. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. This is not connected right at the moment, but I bought these plastic spikes. They look kind of like rebar, and I bought this bird netting to protect every tree from deer. The deer ate this all the way down. It was like up to here. The deer like trimmed all this, but it's kind of like they did my what's it called, where you cut 1/3 of the tree each year? I'm doing a tree video and I can't even remember what that's called. Pruning. It's almost like the deer did the pruning for me, but I think they're too aggressive. They like remove way too much. So yeah, I did this for all these trees. And then on this side, same thing. over here, you can see the netting, and you can see how low they made this tree. It's way too low. It's like at the height of this, you can see that's a branch, and that branch ends right there. So that's ridiculous. Like this was like knee high, and now it's like a foot tall. It was like 2.5 feet tall. But this one they did not do as much, but you can definitely see where the deer bit this off. It bit off at every branch, but it kind of did a good job. It's almost like the deer actually like pruned this thing like professionally. It looks actually really good. It's actually funny. But this one, the deer were messed up. They like they ate it down till it's just like one branch. I think that's ridiculous. Like, come on. Like they didn't leave any like this way ones. So it's just looking like a random nub. So yeah, the deer can't mess with it anymore. I created like a star configuration to give more room for this one because I think this one's gonna grow huge. It's about waist high. They left the height pretty good. I think it'll grow out pretty quickly. Because of all that pruning, it must have done a lot of root development to make up for it. So yeah, that's what we got going. I gotta get more deer netting and more of those stakes because I like how it's going. I'm gonna do more protection, but all the ones the deer love, I got those covered ASAP. So that's all for today. Just a little update on my strategies as we enter into the next season. Getting some nice weather now. Here's a little update. So here I've got one of my trees. I got this packed full of leaves and little twigs and stuff, all stuff that would be naturally found around the base of trees that will feed the soil. So we really made it nice and puffy. And you can just pull up a staple. You can just pull it up without even taking it all the way out and just stuff in and pack it. You can reach way in, and then you can pull up like 4 or 5 staples in the area, shove leaves in, and then push them back down just gently. This one was a blueberry bush, and the deer ate it down like 8 inches, which actually was fine pruning wise, I guess. And you can see I landed on 5. I make a hexagon shape for this, 5 total sticks. And then I got the deer netting. I'm not spiking off the netting in the bottom. I'm just tying it off on the bottom because it's just for deer. And then we've got a separate one for smaller insects, or I mean smaller rodents that could attack the tree. And that's on the interior. So this is all Fort Knox. There's no way anything can get in here. No rodent, no nothing. No deer, nothing. And we got it jam-packed with leaves and stuff. Here's a bucket full of leaves, or wheelbarrow full of leaves, and a little bit of dirt too. You can see some of it has composted down. So I dug beneath the leaves a little bit to where the good stuff is. And I'm adding some of that in with my leaves now. So you can see this is like a pile of broken down leaves and sticks and stuff. It's gonna be excellent. And I just made this square shaped circle. So this is how it looks before. Almost all the grass I put down to protect it's either blown away or completely digested or whatever by the soil. And also it's creeping in. That circle has grass growing in to it. So it's definitely time to get this going on. So this is how it looks before. I took out all the stakes and stuff because I'm prepping this one. And I just put some of the cardboard that used to protect this area, just dumped it on top. I don't want it separating between the ground, which is supposed to have the microbiome come up and eat all this stuff. I don't want it blocking that. That'll be the last thing they eat on the top of the pile. And I got the sprinkler heads here for when I spike that back down on top. Also, there was some weird stuff going on with the graft, and plus I'd rather not have to like carefully prevent it from touching the stem, so I just wrapped all the way down, even beneath the soil line, with cling wrap, and I'll take that off in like a month, I think. But that will just protect some sketchy looking stuff around the graft. There's a little bit of peeling bark in that area. It's like something's growing inside the tree from the... It looks like the rootstock is sending up a shoot inside of the bark of this tree. You know, instead of like setting off a little tree next to it, like a little pup tree, it's actually sending up a tree inside this tree, and it's ripping apart the bark on this tree. So I don't know how that's supposed to pan out, or if it's eventually going to shoot off and split off and I can then prune it. I don't know what the heck to do, but everywhere it's peeling back the bark, that bark is drying out and starting to peel away. It looks scary for the tree. So I figured if I just wrap it all real good so it stays, whatever sap, whatever cambium layer is exposed, just stays with its own moisture, not affected by exterior conditions or disease, just have it completely watertight protected. I figured that would be the best way. And you can see I also pruned it, like this little cut here. Anything dead on it, I just made it nice and simple pruning. And so that's it. And then I'm going to put down my weed barrier fabric with the staples. I got the bird netting, and I got plenty of these spikes. I'm going to do 5 spikes for each one so I can create a hexagon, create plenty of space for the canopy to be able to branch out freely. So that's the process, and that will give plenty of food to build up this ground, because you can see right underneath the grass is pretty thin, but right under it is just plain, that's not black, that's just sand. It's terrible. And so that's all that's under here. And so we're trying to build up like the whole drip line of the tree and then some with really thick, great vegetative material. And this will, every time it rains, because all the microbiome, the worms, the little bugs are going to be crawling up in this stuff. Not to mention this transports a bunch of worms in, because this was already breaking down with the microbiome from behind my house, where this was piled from last fall. This will have a lot of microbiome in it to join the microbiome already there, which is probably minimal, because I showed you guys mostly just sand. So I'm actually transporting in fresh microbiome plus partially decomposed material, and so the existing microbiome will join up with that and start eating all this. And I brought in a bunch of worms that was already in here too, and this will just get broken down. Every time it rains, it's going to be like compost tea going into the ground and reaching the root system with that and feeding that tremendously. So this is going to be a very, very excellent situation here, especially being able to water it daily. It's going to be great, I think. I think it's going to make it. But I really like that idea of the cling wrap. I treated it as though I just did a graft there, because it's almost like some type of weird grafting related, healing related stuff is happening. So why not treat it just like you would with a graft? Even blocking it from light might not be a bad idea. But I guess that's kind of going to happen when I put the landscape fabric against it. So anyways, yeah, I mean, if I block out the light like up to here, it will start sending roots down, and I wouldn't mind that. I could just create a mound and have a higher above ground root system to join the below ground root system, and that can maybe cure some rungs or something. I don't know. So I might try something like that. All right, peace out, guys. I'm gonna have to take off that cling wrap in like maybe 4 or 5 weeks. All right, peace out. All right, boys. So here's a little place you can put your knees on. Just put a piece of plastic down, and you can see what I just did. I just rolled out some of this woven weed barrier fabric, and I put down like once every 6 inches a yard staple, and here's my stack of yard staples. And I also put a couple in the center. They can barely even reach the the ground, whatever that's defined as at this point. You can see how it brought what was pretty crazy looking down to something looking more manageable. It looks like a little mattress for the ground. That's going to actually be a nice insulator too if there's like a cold day or whatever. It's just great in so many ways. And I bet you little mice and stuff are going to try to get under here, but they'll probably eat some of this stuff too, maybe. I don't know. As long as they don't mess up the tree, which I don't think they will. They'll never even find it in this mess. But definitely, like, the worms that are trying to eat this stuff and all the little bugs eating this stuff, the birds will want to eat them, but they won't be able to. This also protects your microbiome, all your little insects and stuff, from birds. And actually, I had this cool idea, which is that in like a month from now, after this is broken down quite a bit more, I could possibly plant something like right here. And just like one in each corner or something, or maybe just like one here and one over that corner. Like plant like cucumber or tomato or something, and have it growing upward and outward toward me on one of the hexagonal shaped things like that. One of those poles with the bird netting, that'd be a great trellis for it to climb up. And so I might do that, since we're kind of expanding the amount of fertile ground available. That won't compete with the tree so much. But I'm kind of iffy on that. I mean, I think the ground can handle it. I could also add some fertilizer by hand or something, like slow release fertilizer, like blood meal or something, some Epsom salt, maybe some fire ashes later in the year. I could just lift up the cover and shove in little scoops of it all around. And I can keep adding this stuff, which will just kickstart everything into high gear. And that would then be able to support, I think, comfortably, not only the tree, but like one or two vegetables. Not overboard, but like I could grow two other things. And then maybe I could grow like in the other two corners like wildflowers. That would bring in pollinators, it'd bring in possibly beneficial insects. And just make it a little more beautified. So I think something like that would be pretty cool. But we'll see. Those are just some ideas. But I just wanted to show the process of putting this tarp down, how I do it. And also, you can see on these edges, it wants to fray right away. You can see that. Like, look at this. And so you take a butane torch and just go along the whole edge, or a propane torch. That's what I've been having to do. You can see how I do that here. The aftermath of it. The edge is kind of wrinkled up and looks burnt. But it won't fray now. Hopefully it won't. I might need to do another application of the melting if I see little fraying spots. So that's like one downside of this fabric, is the fraying, but that's just an extra step. I'm hoping that if you just stay on top of it, melting any loose strings you see coming off, it should be just fine. I also had to melt like the random stuff inside there too. But you just hold the torch far enough away and you just start seeing it shrivel up, even if you hold it like 6 inches away, depending on how hot it is. Alright, so that was just a little update on that part. Alright, so here it is. Sprinklers are in place. I kind of got a low spot right below it, so I know water will go in right there. Kind of plan out where that's going to be, because I just turn it on barely a little bit. It just trickles for like an hour, and then it shuts off. Once every morning at like 10:30 a.m. So we got the 5 total spikes. Got the cling wrap. Looks super nice and clean. Nice and puffy. Looks like a nice pillow you can lay your head on. You could literally lay your head on it if you wanted to go camping. So yeah. That's got a lot of food for the tree. I can show you guys here. This tree had similar damage to the graft section. You can see just kind of like it's not clean. It's like some weird stuff. I don't like seeing that. The white stuff I thought was mold or some disease, but it wasn't. I figured it out. It was that white tree paint I put on last year. It just didn't come off on some of these areas that were more rough, it stayed on better. Kind of like if you scuff sand, paint stays on better. So yeah, because you could see some of it's still on here too. That's just paint. So it's not diseased. It's not as bad as I thought, but I'm still gonna dig down like maybe 1 inch and wrap it really good, like 7 inches with cling wrap. Just locking in the moisture, making sure that it doesn't get any type of diseases or root stem rot or anything. And this way also I can pile up even more organic material right up to the stem without worrying about stem rot, because they say like keep it away from the bark because it could transfer diseases. So if I got it wrapped, it can't get a disease. So I can mound real high all the way up to the tree, and that just gives you a little more extra material. Extra material that you would have lost if you made like a donut shape. That's all the more worms and whatever working right above the base of the root ball under it, where it probably gets the most nutrients from there anyway. So that's a good place to have a lot of compost tea flushing down. Plus all the water that drips down the bark, it will go down the outside of the cling wrap and then seep through all the organic material and bring that broken down organic material right to the roots where it can be absorbed up by the tree. So I'm going to do the same thing as the last tree in this one.